Look at the sky, isn't it strange? All these sort of strange marks, the noughts and crosses, or at least the grid pattern for noughts and crosses going across there.
Climate engineering is the official scientific term, and it has a dictionary definition. Pretty much all weather is now manufactured. All weather is manufactured now, 100% on a daily basis all over the world. Very few clouds you see in the sky are natural, possibly none at all. The crisscross lines and what are termed officially by the Met Office as persistent contrails. The first thing to point out is there is no such thing as a persistent contrail. Actual contrails are actually extremely rare. Minus 57 degrees, which only tends to happen really at 37,000 feet plus or above. Those were official figures by the Met Office. Even the days that we're allowed what we perceive to be a sunny day, the air is full of stuff. Induced cumulus. It's a term I coined, basically. Induced, obviously, because they're false, they're fake, they're created. Yeah. And cumulus, because they look a bit like cumulus clouds, because they're sort of fluffy and, you know, kind of slightly cloud-shaped. Again, they're not real. Now, the way they produce these is they spray these tiny little plastic fibers, micro fibers, into the air. Now, what happens with these things is all the phone masts around the country have some antenna on the top, okay? And this is a dedicated system. The Met Office have some kind of mainframe computer that controls this antenna system. It charges the atmosphere, ionizes the atmosphere. As the atmosphere becomes ionized, all these little plastic fibers form these little fluffy clouds. This is what, the way I discovered this, the first clue to this was, I was at the coast and I knew that these clouds are fake. But one day I thought, oh, hang on a minute. They seem to be appearing at the coastline. And then on another occasion, soon after that, I noticed they were disappearing at the coastline. So, of course, you'd have a great big bank of cloud, and here's the coastline, and they'd come along, and they'd just disappear. So prior to all these offshore wind farms, and I'll expand on that in a sec, you never, ever, ever saw these clouds over sea. Persistent trails are independent of anything else. They're sprayed, they form cloud, and they sit there. They don't rely on any other technology, whereas the induced cumulus rely on what I believe is a system of ionizing antenna across the country. And here's the other thing. So when you go to the NASA Worldview website, so this is a weather monitoring satellite. Now, unfortunately, it only passes over once a day. So you only get a snapshot and it changes each day. So sometimes it can be 5 a.m., 10 a.m., 4 p.m., blah, blah, blah. But you get a pretty good idea of what's going on a daily basis. And it's an invaluable resource. What you see is that these clouds form in rows across the country, either up and down or like that, or, you know, any particular direction. I thought, okay, I've got them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot all the locations of all these antenna, and I bet you they will match the lines. I found a website that has all these antenna, but guess what they've done? On this particular map, although they're using Google as far as I'm aware, you can't see more than one at a time, no matter what you do. And the reason they've done that is speculation, is to hide the pattern. Because if we match the pattern of the clouds to the pattern of the antenna, that's a pretty clear sign that, you know, they're linked. And you can see this. Go to the coast. Make sure there's no offshore wind farm near you, because that's how they've managed to extend this cloud formation into the sea, off the coastline. The greatest weapon you have is a time-lapse camera. This is the thing. Nobody has the time to sit there and watch the sky for hours on end. You see it happening and you see the patterns, and it's absolutely and you catch all sorts of stuff going on. These tiny little plastic fibers, okay, they collect on your tongue. They have nanotechnology in them, and they form into these structures. Now, somehow these structures are interacting with us. Okay, whether it's through the nervous, the vascular system, or connecting directly to the brain, I don't really know. I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't have a biotech laboratory. So there are several primary goals of climate engineering. One is to block the sun. Okay, on the grounds they will one day say, "Oh, we had to do it to protect you against global warming," which we all know is utter rubbish. Sunshine is fundamental to our health. Mental health and physical health. Okay, so that's one aspect. If you block the sunshine, you make people miserable and you make them unhealthy. What are the other reasons? So the other reasons are to poison us with assorted toxins and chemicals. Now, here's an interesting story which happened to me it must have been late 2013. I was on a flight and I was on my own. I think I was coming back from Italy. And suddenly the cabin got really hot and I got really tired and I fell asleep. And I noticed that everyone else, when I started coming round, I noticed that everyone else was also asleep. I thought, that's really odd. And it took me the best part of 3 years to kind of mulch this through in my head. And I suddenly realized what had happened. Have you heard of something called aerotoxic syndrome? So aerotoxic syndrome is the term given to cover up harm produced by trails inside an aircraft, inside the fuselage. So if you're traveling on a plane, so imagine a plane passes behind another plane, it goes through the exhaust plumes. All but one airliner have air coming into the cabin or the fuselage, so you're breathing in the air from outside. So if you go through a trail, taking in the air from that trail, people have been left with neurological disorders, semi-paralyzed, all sorts of really serious health problems. I didn't have any lasting effect, but I fell asleep for I don't know how long, but the whole plane just suddenly fell asleep. God knows what happened to the pilots. What does this suggest? So one, aerotoxic syndrome is an indication that toxins are contained within the trails. So there are all sorts of, hydrocarbons that could be doing horrible things to us. But the fact that a whole plane load of people fell asleep at the same time, the fact the whole plane fell asleep at the same time would suggest sedatives. It could be argued that, that could be coincidence, you could be wrong, this, that, and the other. But ultimately, when you look at the picture collectively, all these things point to the same thing, that they're poisoning us and they're blocking the sun. So we have blocking the sunshine, vitamin D, possible toxins. You mentioned the fact that, how do they protect themselves? Now, again, I don't know all the things that they're spraying, even after my 10 years, because it's very difficult, unless you get up there with a canister and then take it to a laboratory and spend loads of money and time and stuff. I haven't had the time and the funds to do that. I'm pretty sure that they're spraying barium. Okay, barium is touted quite widely as one of the components. While I was still in my university job, we had a biotech lab, and I did do some testing on people's hair and people's nails, and all the results came back very high for barium, strontium, and a couple of other things. So barium, can they protect themselves? Yes. Okay, so I discovered that barium has an affinity to the sulfate ion. So if you there's a thing called, for joints, I can't remember what it's called now, something sulfate, that has a sulfate ion. And I was on those tablets the second time I did my hair test. So the first time I had very high barium. The second time I had no barium at all. And I was like, oh, that's a bit odd. How have I gone from really high to nothing? And I noticed that I was taking these tablets for joint pains. I then tested this a few months later, and I wasn't on those tablets anymore. So I did another hair test, and it was not as high as the first one, but it was up again. It was elevated again. And I thought, okay, what else is sulfate? Epsom salts. So I took some Epsom salts and repeated the test again, 0. So I'm not a chemist. However, from this, what I'm thinking is that what they've got is for the stuff that they're spraying, they have what you might call an antidote. In this case, it's anything with a sulfate ion. Barium has an affinity to sulfate, so it takes the sulfate ion, it forms barium sulfate. Barium sulfate is soluble and you excrete it in your urine. So that's one example. Strontium, no idea. They are constantly looking for new ways to poison us. The idea really is to do it without being caught. So what they do is they poison you, because poisoning is very difficult to prove.